Well, welcome to part five of our James Real Life, Real Faith series. As a reminder, each episode has been corresponded to a chapter. So episode one is chapter one. And so therefore today, Sandy, today's episode five, what chapter are we on?
We're in chapter 5.
Also, it's great to see you, Sandy. Thanks so much for having me
Yeah,
along and keeping me around in this journey. So
sure.
today in chapter five, essentially it's broken down into three parts, right? We have
Yes.
a warning to some of our friends. We have a patience and a belief in what's going to happen. And then this ends in prayer of faith. And so it's these three movements. And all of these are things that James has communicated to us throughout the other books. And I love this because this is a great letter. And I know for me, you and I have had many conversations about this. I love consuming this as a letter. I would love to hear other people love to consume this. I know I get the most value out of it when I just think of it as a complete works. So
Yeah.
where do you have us starting today, Sandy?
Okay, well, because we are consuming it as a letter, this is the closing chapter. And throughout the book of the letter of James, we see these topics come up over and over again. Things like being wealthy versus being poor, and the words that we speak, and how we need to be so careful, and God's wisdom. They're repeated throughout the letter. And once again, after chapter 4, James in chapter 5 begins with this discussion about wealth and riches. So I believe we have to consider that this was a real problem back in the first century. And part of the reason why is because the class system in the first century was different than what we have today. There was fewer wealthy people. Perhaps 15% of the people were middle class, if you will, and
Okay.
5% were very wealthy, and the rest were very poor by our standards. And if when you have that mix, and they're now coming to church, the very wealthy, the middle class who are working, who have a trade or a small business, and then the poor who are just eking out a living, you could have this big conflict over who has what. And again, as we talked about, we see this in our life even today, this class warfare that we all talk about. Although I would say in today's world, and in the United States in particular, we do have more money than, of course, ever. And even
Hmm.
those who are poor, and I'm not in any way saying in a negative way, have some benefits and some things that weren't available then. Like in Israel in the first century, there wasn't any health care, none at all. And they didn't have some of the modern conveniences that the poor can access. They were really on their own. So, yeah, we see this class warfare happening, and he brings this up right off the bat by talking about, are you possessed by your riches? Are you possessed by your riches? Big topic, because there's, again, in other places in the Bible, there's this message around, you can't serve two gods, God
Hmm.
and money. And what do you think is the problem with possessing, accumulating, and owning riches?
Yeah, I think so. I love how you started off with that. This was, if he's starting off with chapter five here, and this is a theme that clearly it was a big problem, and we can get lost in the details of the how and why it was a problem. I think it points specifically to our heart condition that has been consistent through all time, right? We are selfish, we're indulgent, we want more because that gives us, we feel like more control, right? He talks about why are you fattening yourselves up in the end days, some phrase like that, which I find really interesting. Of just your and the tone there seems very condescending, at least the way I interpret it. So why is this important? I think because it's real easy on a superficial glance to say, oh yeah, those rich folks. But also, to your point, we're probably all in the West pretty rich by example. And we all suffer from this heart condition, or can. If we don't keep it in check, it's going to take control, and we're going to lose our soul at the end of the day to things, to objects.
Yeah, I do believe there can be a path by which, as you start to accumulate wealth, that path moves you away from God because you no longer experience a need because you can fulfill the need. And even the want. You can fulfill the need, you can fulfill the want with your riches. And it just, you can end up rejecting Jesus as your Savior and the one you need because you feel confident that you'll have what you need tomorrow. You feel confident that you won't be touched by war or famine, or you won't be homeless, all the things that those who are poorer worry about. And it kind of puts you in the position of saying, I'm in the driver's seat here. I made all this money. I have all this wealth. I don't need God to be in the driver's seat. Mm-hmm. And James is reminding them that you will have misery heaped upon you if all you're focused on is your wealth. And he actually says the rich will weep and howl. So that seems like not a great ending if you're a really rich person.
Bizarre imagery there. Really bizarre. Yeah, I like what you say there, because and I'd be curious your thoughts on this. As somebody that's walked faith for a while, it seems like one of the most potent tools of my life there I've learned faith, that I've learned maturity, is pain, is discomfort.
Yeah.
And when you have resources, it appears that you can lessen that. You can dampen that feeling, right? And then also there's this other bizarre thing that I've noticed if you look throughout anybody that has a lot of power, I think that goes beyond just money. They do tend to talk about lower people as no longer people, right? And that's a weird little thing that I think we're all susceptible to.
Yeah. He describes the wealthy as people who have rejected Jesus. He kind of is describing people who have made God their money. This whole, you can't serve God and money, and these people are choosing to serve their money. But Jesus really desires to make us rich in a different way. But when we end up living for ourselves decade after decade, we end up destroying ourselves through wealth and accumulation and status and being boastful, becoming arrogant, having no humility. And I want to make it clear that I'm not saying that every rich person is not a believer in God. I just think that when you have wealth, you need to be extraordinarily grateful for it and use it to further the kingdom of God and to help people. I mean, you've been blessed by God with wealth, and he expects you to do something with it that helps his people. If you have great wealth, that's great responsibility. It's the people who don't care about others and are just filling their coffers, filling their barns with more stuff, who are going to have a rude awakening when they pass from this life to the other, when God asks them, what did you do with what I gave you? What'd you do with it? I think it's a legitimate question. Like, if you're just storing all the wealth for yourself, thinking that this is going to protect me from the big bad world, the truth is all of that will disappear the day you die. Right? Mm-hmm. The riches, gold, silver, all the stuff, the things that we value will one day amount to nothing. And that one day will be the day you die or before then. So do what Jesus says is the answer, and don't store up treasures for yourself on earth, but in heaven. Pretty simple message. Confusing maybe for those who are very wealthy. Like, what does that mean? Do I have to give it all away? Well, it really speaks to your heart. What does your heart, how is your heart, as you always say, about this topic? Like, I don't think he expects you to give it all away, but I definitely think he expects you to use it to help people, for sure. Those who are unrighteous about money act in a very different way. They hoard it, they cheat people to get it, and then they turn around and use it for their extravagances and luxury in their life. And they use it to feel as though they are better than others and condemn those who live a righteous life. Like, you're a fool if you believe in God. All you really need is wealth. And they become so starstruck by money that it's insatiable. And we can see some titans of industry who just seemingly, it's never ending how much they want to have.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's also interesting, one of the examples that James writes about is he essentially calls them out for not paying the people that mow their fields.
Right.
So this is a little bit more barbed towards, why are you not doing what you're supposed to be doing rather than just accumulating? Now, that isn't a counterpoint to what you just said. I do think that's a wild example, because I can't imagine somebody like not paying their workers at the end of the day. That's another level of greed and selfishness that I do think
but certainly you've heard of that happening where people are saying, you're paying us a below living wage, or, I didn't get paid for something that I did. And it is a weird mentality to think that you would do that.
Yeah, I think that I know that that's out there. I personally feel like it's rare of somebody that would willingly do that. I do think there's a lot of greed by all parties. Do I think that I should be paid more by certain people? Probably. Do certain people think they're overpaying me? Probably. Right? I mean, I think there's a push and pull of humanity in that, but the straight up, like, there's that classification that he paints of, you own land, and the person, the word I used in the version at least that I read was mow your fields. It's like, yeah, wow, like that's the cheap labor. You're not talking about maybe cutting 10% out of your business partner here, right? Like this is just nothing. So it shows, I think, just the depravity of the heart that he's speaking to.
And remember, I talked about the context that a huge percentage of people live day to day, and it was manual labor of all sorts, instead of including gleaning a field or preparing a field. And if you denied them their wages for that, it wasn't just I'm mad at that person. You're literally taking bread off of their table, and their family is going to suffer because they lost a day's wages because you made a decision not to pay them so that you would have more money. It feels really
evil.
bad.
And it's scary, because we do know that we're all can be guilty of just really horrible things. So now, you mentioned suffering, and James, one of his themes that he continues to talk about is patience. Walk me through this next part.
Well, I believe that he feels as though we're always going to have suffering, right? And we are always going to have people who are suffering more because of their economic status or lack of access to the basic necessities of life, clean water, regular food, the medicines that they may need, education. That's always going to be present on the earth. And that's for many different reasons. It can be certainly just the government within which they live. It can be perhaps their own inability to make or manage money. So you're always going to have some suffering. And he's pointing to an agrarian example. Like, well, look at the farmer. Okay, so the farmer is so diligent, and you have to kind of admire how farmers honestly live their life. Like, just, I'm going to start by plowing the field, and then I'm going to seed it or whatever. I'm going to wait for the harvest to come in, and then I'm going to live my life based on how successful it was when some of the elements aren't really theirs to control. Right. And they have to be patient every day that goes by. Is it too much sun? Is it not enough sun? Is it too rainy? And is it too cold? all the things that can affect a crop. And so he's saying, well, apply that same idea to your kind of your begging and your desire and your prayers around, we need the Lord to come back to help us out so we're no longer suffering, right? The hope is that the Lord comes back and ends the suffering for people who are suffering. So right off the bat, after Jesus left and went back to heaven, although clearly he's still with us on earth, there was a wondering and a concern about when is he going to come back again? Kind of a...
Which we still have.
And I think you have some thoughts about what, yeah. But
Yeah, I have a
in
few.
those
I mean-
decades right after he left, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I have a few. Like, it is interesting in all the New Testament that we continually talk about when, do this until he comes back, and he will come back. And there's an urgency about it that I sense that they all seem like it was going to happen quickly, like within a generation or so. And here we are almost 2,000 years later. So I think it just shows how little of probably the whole story that any of us has ever understood. And I know that you have some thoughts as to like maybe why God doesn't show us all the pieces to this plan, why it's so confusing. But it is interesting the metaphor here of that it can, maybe I'm thinking about it too large, but it can be overlaid to our entire life of faith of like plant the seeds, be patient, right? You and I believe as our last time together talked about like, why do we continue to do things we don't want to do when we were talking about the tongue, right? Like, I think it's be patient and listen to God and plant the seeds and reap the harvest. And there's a lot of conditions we can't control in this. So it is an interesting thought when you overlay it, because we have to do this until he comes back, which might be another 2,000 years. We don't know.
Yeah, I think it's folly to think that you somehow know that he's going to come back in your lifetime, because so many generations have already passed since he was here. But then so many generations had passed before he came to earth from heaven. So it's not really our job to try to discern the will of God as to when he's going to reap the harvest, so to speak. Because next time Jesus comes, it's going to be a very different scenario. And it literally is the beginning of the end and then the future creation of new heavens and new earth. So you can think about it. I think about it this way, that God is showing incredible restraint by wanting people to, be in the harvest, if you will. And he's allowing generation after generation to find eternal life through Christ. Like, he wants that to be an opportunity for as long as possible, until some moment in his mind, in his thinking, in his plan, in which he's decided this is the moment when the cycle stops and a new cycle begins. Also, I've said this before, I think that time, the way that we consider time, is not the same way that God does. We think of time in seconds, in minutes, in quarter hours, and days, and years, months, etc. God doesn't think about it that way. Time is a human construct. And I believe that time was created so that we understood there was a beginning and an end to our time here. But that's not how he thinks about time. It's a very different dimensional thing. We're stuck in this construct of time, but he is not, and neither is all those who are in heaven before us. So we're obsessed with time in a way, right?
Yeah, how could we not be?
I don't know. Could you live your life without being obsessed with your age and where you are and your future? And
I think,
can you live your life that way?
I would think, isn't it kind of like, can you live your life without the thought of gravity? Like, I don't think so. Like, God put this here. He's not subject to gravity as we would be as our beings, right? But it's what guides us every day. Our entire world functions on this principle, right? Now, I think it's important to understand. So I'm not saying that to dismiss your idea, because I think your idea is brilliant, right? Of it's always important to remember that this time thing that we feel like this patience, and why we're perceiving this in a way that just God doesn't, right? And I think that does help make sense of how things are if we remember that.
Yeah, I agree. So besides the farmer, he talks about patience of the prophets, who over 5 centuries were revealing little pieces of information or significant pieces of information about the coming Messiah. And God was giving them details about the Messiah, and they were sharing it. But he didn't do it all at once with one person. That wasn't the plan. The plan was something different. The plan was to use the prophets to speak to the people and to the kings over several centuries. And then guess what? No more prophets. So God clearly has a plan that is not ours to know fully, but we do know the end result, because he tells us that in Revelation about how Jesus will come again, and there'll be an end to evil, and we'll all live in the new heavens and the new earth, and we'll be together forever with God as our king, and it will be a beautiful existence. But nobody can say that that's for sure going to happen in our lives. And it's not like people haven't tried over the centuries. People have said he's coming. You know, you see all these stories. Oh, it's a cult. He's coming October 31st. We all have to sell everything and show up in the desert, or he's going to take us all up. It's weird that people fall for that, but it shows some desire to know, to have certainty.
For sure. I think there's also an escapism that comes with it. Like, I don't know. I can tell you, I was raised in the 80s where a lot of that stuff was very prominent in Christian culture. And it just gave me, as a child, nothing but nightmares. Like,
Right.
it was horrible. Like, my parents there was this old televangelist kind of character named Jack Van Imp. And I remember, like, we would watch it over dinner. And this guy's just talking about, like, this dragon rising out of the ocean. And here's little 7-year-old me, like, oh my gosh. Right? Like,
I'm done with dinner. I'm going to go outside.
Right. Like, what are we doing as people of faith, that these are the things that we're latching onto? And then, I remember, I feel like 1991 was a thing. And then, to your point, every few years, there's another person that's like, this is it. If you take this scripture and divide it by 7 and read it backwards and light a candle, right, clearly you're like, come on, what are we doing? Like, it's pretty simple. Can you be a good person?
But what about the big one of 2012, the whole Mayan calendar? Remember that?
Well, and then have you heard that, like, there's now a theory out there that, like, one of the Roman, I'm going to get this wrong, but you'll get the point. Like, one of the Roman Caesars moved the clock by 300 years so he could be the Caesar during the year 1000. And now people are like, all the prophecies are true because we're actually 300 years offset. Like, oh my God. Go away. Go lock yourself in your bunker.
Yeah, it's very strange. There was the Mayan calendar. Oh, and then there was Y2K. Remember that everybody thought the world was going to completely dissolve into chaos. And for months ahead of that, every radio person was talking about, here's the possibilities. I mean, it's just terrifying people.
And as us as Christians, I feel like we fantasize about this. Like, we have like this ghoulish fascination with this stuff. And it's like, why? Like, again, when I'm trying to raise my kids today, when I'm trying to be a good person, that does nothing but distract me from that. It doesn't help me believe in God more or grow closer to God. Like, it's, obviously a rhetorical question, but why do we reach for that stuff so consistently?
Because our faith does speak to a specific thing that will happen again. And we're fixing our hope on that. And it's a critical part of our belief system. So it doesn't surprise me.
I think we're fixing our hope on our salvation, our redemption, to connect with our Creator. I'm not fixing my hope on a literal or metaphorical dragon rising from the ocean, right?
No.
there is a conclusion to this that I have no doubt will happen in some way, some capacity. So I'm not dismissing that, but I'm just saying the cool thing is we get to connect with our Creator, and he's provided a path for us, and we have to clearly acknowledge that we aren't worthy, we're not deserving. I mean, so I'm not trying to undo our salvation, but just there's enough immediately in front of us to work on that is very applicable, right? Like, how could you be a good neighbor? Like, how can you be a good mom, right? Like, how can I be a good dad? Like, how can I be a good business owner? Like, these are actually really challenging things. Thinking about,
it's enough.
if Putin is one of the the Antichrist, it's just not beneficial.
Well, there is a lot of geopolitical stuff that gets pointed to as, oh, this is the axis of evil, which means we're going to live through this at our time. But we just don't know. And that's
we might.
why,
like, I'm not saying that we're not going to. I'm just like, why the obsession with it?
Because people are afraid of what's happening in the world. We live in and perhaps every generation has felt like that. If you lived through World War II, you felt like that. World War I, absolutely. The whole Cold War with atomic weapons. Yeah, we all had to do the drills under our desk, which you're too young for that. But think about that mindset.
I remember them.
Yeah.
There was still a thing when I was a kid. I remember them.
Perhaps we just think that humanity is pushing itself to utter destruction.
Well,
and we're
clearly
keeping an eye out
We're-
for it.
We've always managed to kill a lot of ourselves, and our tools that we have now are quite a bit more scary than bow and arrows, right? But now we find ourselves in the situation, Sandy, that we do a little too often, where you and I have gone on quite the tangent that might be past.
It's your fault.
Now,
it's your fault.
it's always my fault. I get it. Now, James does talk about judging, which is another theme that he comes back to.
Yeah.
And so, as somebody that's just judged our performance here, why do you think James spends so much time? Why is this one of the themes that he talks about? Because it also, and it's consistent in the New Testament, there's this idea of how you judge is how you will be judged. Unpack that for me a little bit.
I think it's one of the biggest faults of human nature. Judgment is ingrained in us for whatever reason. I was just talking with a girlfriend about it. She said, one of my problems is I'm very judgy, and I'm not sure why. But I look at other people. We have a fascination or an interest in looking at other people and comparing ourselves to them. And we're, by extension, we may feel envious of what they have that I don't have. I find myself in that situation. I have a relational issue with one of my children. And so when I see families with their children and their grandchildren, I am envious. And I want to judge, oh, well, they think, or their life is so perfect because they have a perfect family. And they may look at me and said, I'm envious of you because you have a podcast. I don't know, for whatever reason.
You're gonna hang out with me.
You're gonna hang out with Jeremiah. I'm so jealous of that.
Everybody's thinking that.
Everybody is. I'm very
Trust
lucky.
me.
I realize that. But the judgment is so stupid. I don't know. I suppose the cure for it is just realizing that we're all people and we're all fallen. I mean, you hear that dialogue, but how do you apply it to your life for real? How do you stop judging people, Jay? How do you do it?
Well, I think there's so here's my question is I feel like when we judge others, it goes one or two ways. You judge them and you say they don't deserve that, or they did something bad. You're like, haha, you suffer, you deserve it, whatever. Or we put it back on ourselves. And I know I fall in the latter category. When I see somebody, I'm most of the time like very happy for them. They have whatever it is. And then I get like, why don't I have it? Why am I so broken? Why am I so messed up that I can't make that happen for me, right? So I think that everybody functions in one way or the other, or defaults to one position. And why? That's a question that I have no answer to. right? I know you're going to be shocked that I don't. But no, I don't know. I don't
Probably.
know what it is. And it's interesting to me, even when I hear other people who are quite successful talk about how hard they are on themselves or how mean they can be to themselves. It seems baked into our DNA that nobody
Yeah.
is really satisfied with who they are.
Well, we can
And
see Jesus constantly trying to bring this up in terms of having mercy towards yourself and mercy
mhm,
towards others. Like from mercy, it covers a multitude of sins. It keeps us from being judgmental. So I don't know. Maybe it's as simple as we just don't have enough mercy. We don't have enough for ourselves, and we don't have enough for others. And God would really want to say, listen, whoever it is that you're envious of or judging, they have issues too. And it's not that you shouldn't want their issues to be worse than yours. You should be empathetic to the fact that everybody has problems. Everybody has issues, things they're working on. Nobody escapes this life without having, whether it's financial or relational or physical or spiritual or mental health issues. It's just not possible.
mhm.
So there is no perfection. So why do we think that others have it? Why do we judge other people when we think they have it? Or why do we judge ourselves? Why are we so hard on ourselves? But it's a
Yeah,
problem in the church, in the early church. That's James's point. This is a problem because as people are coming together, I think in the early church there was some business around letting the wealthy people sit up front and
mhm.
giving them assigned seats and allowing them to have status in the church above others. Well, could you imagine if that were the case today? Like if, the church designated reserved seats for people who were the biggest givers? That would not go. I mean, it's just a bad idea. A
Well,
bad
yeah, well,
idea.
I've seen equivalencies of that for sure. It is human nature that we have needs, and people of means can take care of our needs. Um, Now, the judging thing, I have a theory that I want to bounce off of you.
Okay.
So I think a lot of wisdom given from the Bible is true spiritual wisdom, and also there's a duplicity in it, like it's very applicable. So don't judge as that's how you'll be judged. It seems to be a spiritual discipline, but also like if you're running around judging everybody, I think however you look at the world, you're going to look at yourself 10 times worse, right? So if I'm running around judging everybody, imagine the voice in my head towards me, right? And so I almost wonder, is this a spiritual discipline and also just a good mental health discipline in addition to that of like just stop judging people, because if you stop judging them, maybe you'll stop judging yourself.
Absolutely. I think you're more likely to have pleasant relationships, peaceful relationships, relationships that grow based on, truth and shared stories of life when you just knock off the judging and you just get to the heart of the person. Tell me about you. Who are you? Now, it's not always easy to do. Some people don't want to go there with you.
Hmm.
They want to have a persona and they want to maintain that persona no matter what. But as Christians, we're called to say the outward appearance is not what should matter. It's what is inside of us that should matter. So, yeah, the other message really is about judgment. Who is capable of judging correctly?
Right.
Who is?
God, Jesus, that's it.
Exactly. I mean, we had judges in the court of law, but we're not very good at judging stuff. We're just not. We get it wrong a lot, and we should probably just stop it. I mean, you have to do some of that just to contradict myself. Like when you have a business, you
Isn't
have to
that more
have some.
discernment than judgment?
Well, yes, but
I mean,
are
that
you
that would
not
be
at the
my.
end? Are you not at the end of your discernment making a judgment call? Like,
Yeah, we're parsing language, but I agree with your sentiment. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, you are making a judgment call. And the reality is certain things are bad, right? There
Yeah.
are just very clear things that and the world's done, I've done, you've done that are like, yeah, that was bad. That was a mistake.
Yeah.
Now, I do always take solace in the idea of all the moments where somebody gave Jesus the power to judge, he never took it. You know, of just the people that he did judge were the people that messed up his father's house, right? Those are the people that he went after. The rest,
He was definitely judging the religious leaders, and he was right to do so.
But like the woman, he did not throw the stone, right? Like he would have been inside the law to do that, and he didn't.
Or the woman at the well, he didn't judge her, whereas society did. Maybe what we're doing here is splitting hairs, because you do have to use judgment, discernment, judgment. But when it comes to your feelings about somebody else, you know, be very careful about how you're judging somebody. I also, to your point, if you have discernment about a person and you realize this person is not a healthy person for me to be around, or a spiritual person is and actually against my faith, then you may have to say, my action is I'm going to remove myself from that sphere of influence. But your action shouldn't be, well, I could get something from that person, but still I really don't like them because of their behavior or this or that. That's a little bit two-minded, double-minded in a way.
Absolutely.
So judgment.
So what's our third part of this?
The next part is he talks about oaths, like oath taking. You know, I swear I'm going to get this done, or I promise you something, which happens frequently. And when it doesn't come to fruition, when we don't do it, we're breaking an oath. And he's like, you shouldn't swear an oath under any conditions, because it binds you to something and you have no idea what the future will bring. Kind of a simple thought, really. Like, I am going to, I don't know, maybe you can give me an example as a business owner. I promise you I'm going to get this done. And you're almost swearing an oath and it's binding you to something, but you don't really know what's going to happen in the future.
Right.
It should be more like your yes is yes and your no is no. I know we've talked about this already, that Jeremiah, are you going to get this project done? Yes, I will. You don't have to promise me something. You just say, yeah, I'm going to do it.
Yeah, all this stuff, it sounds very superficial, but when it goes down to the heart condition of, if you're out there trying to, you know, make theater of the moment, why? Have you not lived your life in such a way that your yes is yes and your no is no? And if I say yes to something and I lose my arm and I can't do it, like, you're going to, like, that doesn't negate my yes per se. It's just like life circumstances happen. And then also, are you humble enough to, James has done this a few times where he's brought up, are you humble enough to understand you don't control the circumstances, right? You are like a mist. Why are you saying you're going to go to the city and do this? You don't know. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that doesn't mean we shouldn't make plans. We shouldn't try to have good lives, but just acknowledge if it's in God's will, this will happen, kind of thing. You know, just acknowledge. I mean,
there is something in there that he's getting to that is more of a devious nature than just making a plan, right? There's this, again, as you say, is a heart problem, because perhaps we're swearing we'll do something. I'll quit drinking, or I'll, stop watching porn, and you're swearing that you'll do it, but then maybe inside you, I'm not going to do that. So in a matter of speaking, you're taking an oath to stop something, but maybe you really know, I'm not sure I'm actually going to do that. He's like, instead, just tell the truth, Right. And this is the challenge of speaking the truth. And if you've ever been around an alcoholic, there's alcoholism in my family. you know that they always want to speak to the fact that they're going to quit, but then the pull of it, the addiction, makes it hard for them to do that. I guess that's why AA is so successful, because it's the whole one day at a time. Anyway, that's kind of off the subject too, but really
Well,
his
I think
point
that
is
is maybe more pointed than you believe, because
okay,
that is
good.
what James is kind of telling us with our faith, right?
Yeah.
Like one day at a time, guys. Like
Yeah.
just live it and have patience that it's going to come out just like a farmer. He's going to do it one day at a time, and he's going to have faith and patience that it's going to get there, right?
Yeah, and I like to kind of wrap up some of this with this idea of, if you could craft an ideal day as a Christian following James's advice, his letter, what would that day look like?
You're going to put me on the spot here.
You do it to me all the time.
That's my job, not your job, right? What would an ideal day look like under James's
Yeah.
letter, under that idea? Okay. Man, I know he doesn't directly say this, but I would take it as a lot of grace. A lot of grace for me and a lot of grace for everybody around me. Let your yes be yes, your no be no. Pray and hope for the best for everybody, right? Like even the people you don't like. Pray and hope for the best. I guess I do think there's something that you would want them doing that for you, right? And I do think that if you can pray and hope for the best for everyone, you're going to hope that for yourself, and you're going to understand your place in this world. And remember that we're missed disappearing, and that doesn't speak to our value. It just speaks to just our reality, right?
Yeah.
That would I think that's how I'd answer that question.
I
Thanks
love
again for being
that.
put on the
I
spot.
love that. I would add monitoring our speech, right? In
Yeah,
every
he did do that. I
day.
did miss that part.
Yeah, like being more careful with our speech. I also think this, you said pray, but I think a specific prayer around wisdom every day, adding that into your prayer routine, grant me wisdom for this or that, would also be helpful. And then the last is this judgment thing, like get it under control, like figure out why you do it and don't do it. If you did that every day, you could develop some really great habits and actions that the Lord would highly value. So,
I'm glad you just fixed all your problems.
yeah, yeah. James is a problem fixer. I like that. He's coming in and clearing out the debris and getting to the heart of the matter. He does speak to prayer here at the very end, and he's like, specifically, what should we do when we are sick? Because again, no health care there. He's like, we should pray, and you should call somebody, tell them you need prayer. It's very common in the Christian world, right? I need prayer for this or that. And I used to think, well, that's so, it's a little bit weird just asking for prayer. But I believe those prayer warriors who ask for it, man, they are getting their prayers answered. And we should ask them to pray for us. Our pastor, the elders, our community at the church, our own Christian community around us. And we should pray prayers of faith, encourage our faith and make it stronger. And we should also confess our sins. So this whole prayer life is certainly important. Healing for people really requires both spiritual healing and physical healing, because we can be sick in either way. And James is also calling for us to act on what we've gotten and evangelize. I know evangelism is not a popular word right now, but it's a very important endeavor. We need it more than ever. We need to help to bring people back to Christ if they've walked away, or bring new people to Christ now more than ever. So he's saying, just don't think about, do it. Do it with gentleness and reverence, but still do it. And do you evangelize? Do you find yourself evangelizing among friends or family?
I mean, I guess what is the definition of it? Do I find myself, I was a part of a thing in the early 2000s where it's like the great comfort, like evangelistic kind of stuff. And do I do that anymore? No, I don't think that's good. Do I bring up that I believe in a God? I believe that God loves me, loves you, and wants to do everything he can to be close to you and bring you into a relationship with him. Yeah, I try to live my life that way. And I try to have those conversations. And I think it's very interesting how James closes this letter, right? I'm reading from the NIV here. My brothers and sisters, if one of you should wander from the truth and someone should bring that person back, remember this. Whoever turns a sinner from the error of their ways will save them from death and cover over a multitude of sins. It's kind of
That's beautiful.
Odd way to end a letter and very poignant,
Yeah, I love it. I think that's a great way to end our discussion on chapter 5. Just to wrap up the whole series, as we've spent so much time in it, I believe there is some amazing content here for every Christian, and pulling it apart and looking at what does it look, how do I apply it, how do I move my faith from static to active, how do I apply these wise words of James to my life every day. I don't see how anything but good could come out of that.
Absolutely. It's a very poignant little 5 chapters that, when you peel those layers back, cut to the heart of many issues.
Yeah, well, what's your big takeaway from James?
Big takeaway from James. I love how well written this is. How it really feels like a letter to me. That I like that. I like how personal that is to the people he's writing to, and how much that it clearly comes across that he cares about these people, and he's giving them, and by proxy us, very simple tools to have a better faith, right? Yeah. Understand who you're, like a mist, right? Understand who and what you are. And I'm not speaking to our value, but just our place in the universe. Yeah. And there's a God that loves us, and don't value money, don't value control. Have faith, have perseverance. I mean, the idea of consider it, the testing of your faith, that's not the language that he uses, but consider it joy, right? Yeah. I think that's, in this season of my life, giving me a frame up of, maybe not reach for some of those escapism tools that we all carry with us, and consider this joy so we can become better tomorrow.
I love it. I love that. I think that's the perfect way to wrap it up. And I'm very excited for people to go through this journey with us. And also excited to be working on our next podcast, which we'll announce, our next series. We'll announce that in a few weeks. So
love it.
Thanks for the journey, Jeremiah, through James. The journey through James. It was fantastic. Really appreciate it.
Appreciate you, Sandy.
Take care. All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.